From the decisive victory at Yorktown in October 1781, the American Revolution entered a new and uncertain chapter. The thunder of cannons and the cries of battle faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet but equally tense atmosphere of political maneuvering. Independence had been won on the battlefield, but it was yet to be sealed in the courts and conference rooms of Europe. What lay ahead was not a matter of musket volleys or bayonet charges, but of diplomacy, patience, and the ability to navigate the tangled ambitions of nations. The surrender of General Cornwallis had electrified the American cause. In taverns from Boston to Charleston, there was celebration. In London, there was disbelief. Yet beneath the jubilation, leaders like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay understood a sobering truth: until Britain formally recognized the United States as an independent nation, the war was not truly over. Diplomacy in the late 18th century was an art form as much as a science. It involved careful letter writing in cipher, delicate flattery of foreign ministers, and a willingness to spend long nights in rooms heavy with candle smoke, debating over the placement of a single border line on a map. The journey from Yorktown to the signing of the Treaty of Paris would be one of the most intricate diplomatic dances in modern history. And it would test the resolve of a young nation still uncertain of its place in the world. In October of 1781, Yorktown, Virginia, became the decisive stage upon which the fate of the war would be determined. The Allied armies of General George Washington and the French commander, the Comte de Rochambeau, executed a campaign that remains one of the most brilliant in military history. This was no simple battlefield clash, it was a coordinated operation of land and sea, involving thousands of soldiers, fleets, and an intricate web of deception. Washington had feigned preparations to attack New York City, lulling British General Sir Henry Clinton into a defensive stance there, while secretly marching south toward Virginia. Rochambeau's disciplined French troops moved in perfect coordination with their American allies, their uniforms bright against the autumn fields. Meanwhile, Admiral de Grasse's French fleet sailed into the Chesapeake Bay, cutting off any escape or reinforcement by sea. The siege of Yorktown unfolded with methodical precision. Allied troops dug parallel trenches, inching closer to the British defenses, their movements illuminated at night by the glow of campfires and the occasional burst of artillery fire. British soldiers, worn by weeks of bombardment, found their positions collapsing under the combined assault. On October 19, Cornwallis surrendered, unable to break the stranglehold. News of Yorktown raced across the Atlantic. In America, church bells rang and crowds filled the streets. In Britain, Prime Minister Lord North reportedly exclaimed, "Oh God, it's all over." It was a turning point, but not the end. The war still smoldered in other theaters, and in the minds of politicians who had yet to accept defeat. With Cornwallis's surrender, political pressure on the British government intensified. Lord North's ministry crumbled, and the Whig leader Lord Rockingham assumed the premiership, bringing with him a willingness to consider peace. Across the Atlantic, the Continental Congress appointed three distinguished figures to negotiate: Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay. Franklin was already in Paris, a master of charm and wit, his reputation giving him access to the highest circles of French society. Adams, tireless and principled, carried the determination of a man who had long argued for independence. Jay, a skilled diplomat, brought a sharp eye for legal detail and a cautious mistrust of foreign motives. The early months of 1782 saw the American envoys navigating a complex environment. Paris was a city of light and intrigue, where alliances shifted in smoky salons and diplomatic dinners could alter the course of history. French Foreign Minister Charles Gravier, Comte de Vergennes, sought to mediate negotiations, but France had its own goals, chief among them to weaken Britain while securing territorial advantages for itself and its allies, Spain and the Netherlands. For the Americans, the challenge was to secure recognition of independence and favorable boundaries without being outmaneuvered by their own allies. The negotiations were never simply between Britain and the United States. France, Spain, and the Netherlands each brought their own demands to the table. Spain sought control over Gibraltar and the Mississippi River, France sought to restore territories lost in previous wars. Britain, sensing opportunity, attempted to exploit these divisions to improve its own terms. The American envoys began to grow wary of French intentions. John Jay, in particular, suspected that France might sacrifice American interests, especially concerning Western land claims, in order to placate Spain. Against Congress's original instructions, the Americans decided to negotiate directly with the British, keeping their talks hidden from the French. In discreet meetings held in candlelit chambers, drafts were passed back and forth. Maps were unrolled across heavy wooden tables, and lines were drawn and erased as each side pressed its claims. It was diplomacy conducted in whispers, over glasses of claret, under the watchful eyes of servants sworn to secrecy. On November 30, 1782, the United States and Great Britain signed the preliminary Articles of Peace. The road to that moment had been grueling. Negotiators wrangled over boundaries, fishing rights in the North Atlantic, and the restitution of property to loyalists who had remained loyal to the Crown during the war. The signing took place in a room heavy with the scent of wax and parchment. Oil lamps flickered, casting long shadows over the polished table. The American delegation, Franklin in his spectacles, Adams with his firm expression, Jay with his deliberate hand, placed their signatures with solemn gravity. Across from them, the British envoys affixed their names, the scratching of quills the only sound in the stillness. News of the preliminary agreement spread quickly. In America, it was greeted with joy, though tempered by the knowledge that final peace had yet to be secured. In Britain, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a necessary concession, others as a humiliating surrender. The final peace came on September 3, 1783. The Treaty of Paris, signed on that day, formally ended the war between Great Britain and the United States. It was part of a larger set of treaties signed the same day between Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. The American treaty recognized the independence of the United States, established generous boundaries reaching to the Mississippi River, and granted fishing rights off the coast of Newfoundland. It was a diplomatic triumph that exceeded what many had believed possible at the war's outset. The signing was a carefully choreographed affair. The Grand Hall was adorned with flags and maps, the delegates wore their finest attire. Expressions ranged from satisfaction to resignation. The documents were laid out on a long table, the ink still glistening as each man signed in turn. Outside, the city carried on, largely unaware of the world-shaping agreement being finalized within. Peace, however, brought its own set of challenges. The war had left the American economy in shambles. Public debt was staggering, trade networks disrupted, and inflation rampant. The loose confederation of states struggled to coordinate policies, and disputes over borders and trade flared between them. On the frontier, settlers pushed westward into lands long inhabited by Native American nations, leading to new conflicts. For many veterans, the return to civilian life was difficult, promised wages and pensions were often unpaid, and work was scarce. Yet there was also a sense of hope, of civic buildings being raised, of constitutions being drafted, of a society experimenting with the principles it had fought to defend. The years from 1781 to 1783 were transformative, ending a war and birthing a nation. They were years of perseverance in diplomacy as much as in battle, and they set the stage for the United States to take its first uncertain steps onto the world stage. The story of these years is a reminder that independence is not a single event, but a process, one that demands courage in negotiation as much as in combat. The young republic would go on to face trials and triumphs beyond the imagination of those who signed the Treaty of Paris. But the foundation laid in these pivotal years would endure. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the final chapter of the American Revolution. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and share to support more historical storytelling. Your engagement helps bring history to life for audiences everywhere.